There he was again. Benjamin Parker, 65 years old, tired face, eyes sunken with dark circles and the smell of cheap whiskey embedded in his wrinkled shirt. Sitting on one of the torn leather benches of the underground gambling house, he held an almost empty bottle in one hand and in the other, dice that seemed to contain more hope than he himself possessed. The environment was stifling, heavy with smoke and tension. Ceiling fans spun lazily, providing no relief to anyone. Sweaty men murmured bets through clenched teeth, and the clinking of chips in the background sounded like an addicted hymn of perdition. Benjamin was sweating, not from heat, but from anxiety. He sweated like someone betting their soul and knowing they might not have time to buy it back. As the dice rolled on the table, he felt the world stop. For 1 second, just 1 second, electricity ran through his body like a bolt of hope. That was the exact dose of illusion that kept him alive. The fantasy that, with a stroke of luck, $800,000 in debt would evaporate. That Royce, the loan shark, would forget about him. That everything would go back to the way it was before. But luck didn't come. Again. It was the 8th time that night, and like a dog returning to the master who beats it, Benjamin forced a bitter smile, filled his chest, and said, "Let's go one more time, guys. I know it's going to turn around now. This time, luck will be with me." He was addicted. After Clarice, his wife, was taken by cruel cancer, Ben found himself in a dead end. The hospital debts he couldn't pay, the bills, the expenses. But gambling could bring a quick solution. Just one hit, and his life could change forever. He could pay off his debts, pay the house mortgage, Julia's college. That's what Benjamin thought. Then, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. Firm, dry, uninvited. Benjamin turned slowly and saw Royce's bodyguard. A tall black man, arms too wide for the cheap suit he wore. He wore dark glasses, a gold earring in his right ear, and a countenance that left no room for conversation. "Let's go, Parker. Royce wants to talk to you." His voice was firm and brooked no refusal. The table fell silent. Benjamin knew he had no choice. The night's roulette had spun, and now he was the one at stake. "Benjamin!" Royce shouted enthusiastically, smiling and showing his gold tooth, as if he were seeing an old friend he hadn't seen in decades. He was a fat man, red as a pig, bald, with sideburns that made it look like he still lived in the 80s. He wore a cheap brown suit, a heavy gold chain around his neck and several rings on his hands, all of course taken as payment from his victims. And now, Benjamin was about to become another name crossed off the list. "Hello, Royce." "How are you?" said Benjamin, apprehensive, nervous, anxious. "I'm great, Ben. Better now, knowing you owe me a favor," replied Royce, setting aside the fake smile and showing his claws. "Royce, I know I owe you some money, but I'm going to pay. Some money." Royce let out a dry, sarcastic laugh, picking up a toothpick with theatrical contempt. "My friend Ben, you owe me $800,000. "I don't think that's some," he said, looking over his glasses. Benjamin swallowed hard. When did he get lost? When did life take this turn? How did he get to all this debt without realizing it? "Royce, I can get a loan from the bank. I'll be able to pay. Just give me time." "Ah, Benjamin." Royce took off his dark glasses and stared at him. "I've been in this business for many years. I really wish I could believe your word. You're a good man, Ben. I know you want to pay me everything. But look, we're in America, and look at yourself." Royce leaned back, amused by his own irony. "The bank is threatening to take your house. The debt from the loans you took to pay for your wife's cancer treatment, God rest her soul, is growing every day." He made the sign of the cross, in a gesture of false piety. "What crazy bank do you think is going to lend you $800,000? He laughed loudly, looking at the bodyguards, while Benjamin sank into the chair as if he were shrinking. "But look here, Ben," said Royce, returning his tone of voice to something almost sweet. "I'm a merciful man, and you have something that interests me. Benjamin felt a chill. God, he could see the devil in that man's eyes. What do I have that interests you, Royce? My house. We can work something out. Don't play dumb, Benjamin. Royce slammed the table violently. The mask fell. The fake sympathy gave way to an angry pig, possessed. But he soon composed himself, settling in his chair with pretended elegance. I want your daughter, Benjamin. Benjamin's heart almost jumped out of his mouth. His vision darkened for an instant, as if he'd been punched. Julia? That bastard wanted his Julia? His little girl, who despite being 23 years old was still his baby girl. He felt like the worst of creatures. A broken, indebted man, bringing his most precious possession into the mud he himself had dug. Royce, I don't think I understood. My daughter. She's a good girl. Works 2 jobs to help me with the bills. Never got into trouble. She's not like the girls who work here, said Benjamin, now unable to contain the tears streaming down his face. Stop crying, man. You look even more pathetic that way, said Royce with an expression of disgust. Ben, that's how the world works. Did you think you could come here every night, drink my whiskey, play with my money, like I was some idiot? Royce was already standing, puffing out his chest like an exalted peacock. Thank me for still wanting something from you. Otherwise, you wouldn't even come home for dinner today. He stopped, took a deep breath and lowered his tone again. His eyes burned. I want Julia for my own interests. I don't care that she's not like the girls who work for me. That's exactly what makes me want her so much. There was a repulsive malice in his gaze. And the more he talked, the more Benjamin wished someone would simply end it all. Benjamin, I'm giving you an opportunity. Consider this a gift from destiny. I don't usually make this kind of deal with rat men like you. Bring me your Julia next Thursday, willingly, and I'll forgive everything you owe me. Or else. You better find a way to get $800,000, Royce completed, giving a diabolical laugh while extinguishing his cigarette in the ashtray. Benjamin left desperate, his heart beating rapidly, his vision dark. He felt his world collapse. He hoped Royce would hurt him. Maybe deep down that's what he even wanted. But his daughter? His Julia? He couldn't bear it. Then, like a breath of destiny, he had an idea. It seemed crazy, but it was the only way. Benjamin! Maria, the head housekeeper, opened the door with surprise. What brings you here in this weather? The Collins estate stood like a fortress against the storm, its Gothic architecture a testament to old money and older power. Benjamin had been a driver for that family for more than 20 years. I need to see Dr. Collins, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Please, Maria. It's life or death. She led him through marble halls lined with oil paintings of Collins' ancestors, their stern faces seeming to judge him as he passed. The study smelled of leather and expensive bourbon, and behind the massive mahogany desk sat Dylan Collins, 28 years old, devastatingly handsome, and colder than the storm outside. He was the grandson of Edward Collins, the man Benjamin had worked for so many years. Dylan didn't look up from his medical journals. You have 2 minutes, Benjamin. Make it count. Dr. Collins, Benjamin began, his voice breaking. I know this sounds insane, but some of the old staff mentioned that you're looking for a wife. Now Dylan looked up, one dark eyebrow arched in aristocratic disdain. Are you offering your services as a matchmaker? Because your track record with life choices isn't exactly impressive. The words cut deep, but Benjamin didn't let himself be intimidated. After all, he was desperate, and to save his daughter, he was willing to submit to any kind of humiliation. Please, just listen. I'm drowning, Dr. Collins. After Clarice died, I lost myself. The grief was eating me alive, and I thought gambling would numb the pain. But it didn't. It just made everything worse. Dylan leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. And now you want me to bail you out. How much? $800,000, Benjamin whispered, the number falling like a death sentence. That's a substantial debt for a man with no assets, Dylan observed coldly. What makes you think I'd invest in such a poor risk? Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm not asking you to invest in me. I'm asking you to invest in my daughter. Julia she's everything good I have left after my wife passed. She's beautiful, yes, but she's so much more than that. She's intelligent. She studied literature. She's brilliant, Dr. Collins, and I can't let her life be ruined by my wrong choices. She has a mind, Dr. Collins. She sees the world with eyes that haven't been corrupted by money or status. For the first time, Dylan's expression shifted slightly. Go on. She's pure in a way this world doesn't deserve. She works at Miller's Diner, saving every penny for her future. And on weekends, she volunteers to teach children who can't afford tutors. She asks for nothing and gives everything. Benjamin's voice broke completely. She's the only good thing I've ever done, and now she's going to pay for my sins if I can't stop it. Dylan was quiet for a long moment, studying the broken man before him. 800,000 was pocket change to him, but why would he tie himself to a waitress from the wrong side of town? On the other hand, every woman in his social circle bored him, vapid creatures more interested in his bank account than his mind or ideas. I'll need to meet her first, Dylan said finally. Consider it. A courtesy for the times you were loyal to my grandfather. Miller's Diner buzzed with the usual lunch crowd, but Dylan felt like he was in another world. He'd traded his usual Armani for simple slacks and a button-down shirt, trying to blend in. The copy of the Brothers Karamazov sat prominently on his table. His test. She appeared like something from a dream, moving between tables with unconscious grace. Even in the unflattering uniform, Julia Parker was stunning. But it was the intelligence in her dark eyes that truly captured his attention. What would you like to order? She asked in a friendly, warm manner, pen poised over her notepad. Just coffee, he replied. You have good taste in books, she said with a flattering smile while noting his order in her notepad. Dostoevsky, he said simply. Do you like him? He asked with genuine curiosity. Julia looked up, surprised. I do, yes. But it's not light reading for coffee, don't you think? She responded with a slight smile. Is he your favorite? Not exactly. But he's a good filter. He took a sip of the freshly arrived coffee. Separates those who read out of habit from those who read out of hunger. She tilted her head slightly. And what are you hungry for? Dylan observed her face for a second longer than he should have. To understand human beings. To understand myself, perhaps. Julia rested her notepad against her hip. So you're one of those who believes all pain needs to be understood? No. But I think it's dangerous to ignore what it's trying to say, he said softly, observing her face. She smiled with one corner of her mouth. You talk like someone who has suffered a lot or read too much. Maybe both, he said. Julia took a deep breath, as if something in her recognized a familiar depth. I prefer Notes from Underground. It's more honest. The character knows he's small, petty, and doesn't try to pretend he's not. That's rare these days. Dylan raised an eyebrow, surprised. You've actually read Dostoevsky? More than I should have, perhaps. I work here during the day, but at night I study literature. It's my way of keeping my sanity. He observed her more carefully now. Not just beautiful, not just kind, but alive. That sounds like someone who's trying to escape. Not escape, survive. She shrugged, returning to her waitress posture for a moment. Do you want something to eat? No, just the coffee. And maybe another conversation, he said, as he came to the conclusion that this could actually be interesting. Maybe Benjamin wasn't so crazy after all. She looked at him, half laughing, half suspicious. Julia! The harsh voice of Richard, the diner manager, cut through their conversation like a blade. Get back to work. I'm sorry, Julia said, her cheeks flushing as she stood up. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, Dylan said quietly. It was illuminating. As she walked away, Dylan watched her serve other customers with the same grace and warmth she'd shown him. He finished his coffee slowly, his decision made. When he reached his car, his phone was already in his hand. Benjamin, I met your daughter. We have a deal. Benjamin was nervous, adjusting his tie while the sound of a doorbell echoed through the house. It was a humble home, but tidy, smelling of coffee and a happy past that he tried in vain to recapture. He opened the door, and there stood Dylan. Julia, who was coming from the kitchen with a cup of tea in her hand, stopped, confused. What is he doing here, Dad? She whispered to Benjamin, the cup almost slipping from her hand. How do you know him? Benjamin stammered, unable to answer. Dylan entered with a serious expression, and tension filled the room. He looked at Julia with a gaze she couldn't decipher. It wasn't the look from the day before, that one of admiration and interest, but a business look. Julia, please sit down, Benjamin said, his voice trembling. We need to talk about what happened. I lost everything. I sank into debt, and I didn't know what to do. I was threatened, and I did something to protect you. Protect me from what, Dad? She asked, her heart racing. What are you talking about? Benjamin, with tears in his eyes, let the words out in one breath. After your mother left, I got lost. The gambling seemed to be the only thing that distracted me from the pain. I thought that on the next bet, luck would turn, and I'd be able to pay the house mortgage and get out of the hole. I got into debt for $800,000 with Royce. And every time I felt like I was going to have a chance, I buried myself deeper. He threatened me, Julia. He said that if I didn't pay, he would hurt you. So I looked for Dr. Collins. He was looking for a wife, and I made a deal with him. He's going to marry you. It's the only way to pay the debt. Julia was shocked. The teacup finally slipped and broke on the floor, the sound of glass shattering echoing through the room. What? She said, terrified. You sold me? To him? Dylan, who had been watching the scene in silence, stepped forward. Benjamin, please, give us some privacy, he said, his voice firm. I need to talk to your daughter alone. Benjamin, his face pale, withdrew, leaving the two alone in the room, with the pieces of glass on the floor. Julia was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. What kind of man makes a deal like that? She asked, her voice full of anger and betrayal. Dylan didn't flinch. He bent down, picked up a piece of glass, and looked at her. I only need an intelligent and beautiful wife who won't embarrass me in the environments I have to attend. And you seem to be more than just a pretty face. This marriage will be purely for convenience. I pay your father's debt, give him some comfort so he can age in peace, and ask for support from the psychiatric board of my hospital to help him treat this unhealthy dependence on gambling and alcohol. He stood up, his voice becoming firmer. In return, you just pose by my side at social events that my name and position oblige me to participate in, stay in shape to show that we are disciplined people, and command my house staff. There aren't many, just a housekeeper, 2 cleaning ladies, a cook, 2 drivers, and a gardener. The house must be impeccable because I frequently receive important visitors. Although I have all these employees, my housekeeper Maria insists on wanting my opinion on almost everything. Dr. Collins, what should be the menu for today's cocktail party? Dr. Collins, what colors should the next curtains in the main room be? He let out a dry laugh. Anyway, I believe that a man like me shouldn't waste time answering this kind of thing, if you know what I mean. My domestic staff needs me to have a wife as much as I do. Julia couldn't help but let out a laugh, somewhat ironic. You've got to be kidding. The richest doctor in town needs a Cinderella. Dylan didn't smile. He became more serious. Call it whatever you want, Parker. Let's say you need my help and I need yours. I think it could be a good deal for both of us, and... He looked at her, and his voice became a whisper. Don't worry about physical contact. I usually go to clubs when I need to have some fun. I won't touch you, unless you want me to. Julia felt a mixture of dread and fascination. What kind of woman would refuse to be touched by a man as attractive as him, she thought. But he can't know that. A man like him, handsome, rich, powerful, and influential. If he suspects that I feel so attracted to him, he'll know he has me in his hands, and we know what a man is capable of doing when he knows he has a woman head over heels for him. I accept, Julia said aloud, her voice full of determination. But with one condition. You won't lay a finger on me. Not at all. Dylan, who was at the door, turned to her and smiled. All right. We have a deal. Tomorrow I'll be here with my lawyer to sign the contracts, and you'll come back with me to my house. Have your bags ready at 9 in the morning. He paused, looking at her in a way that made her shrink. Miss Parker, he said, his voice full of irony, I'm sure you'll change your mind. About the marriage? She asked, confused. No, he replied, letting out a sarcastic smile. About letting me touch you. He turned and left. Julia watched him go, her body trembling. After all, what was that feeling? The Collins estate was even more impressive in daylight, a sprawling mansion that spoke of generations of wealth and power. As Dylan's car crunched up the gravel driveway, Julia pressed her face to the window, trying to process that this would be her home. Overwhelming? Dylan asked, noting her expression. Intimidating, she corrected honestly. Good, it should be. Maria, the head housekeeper, greeted them at the front door. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Welcome home, Mrs. Collins, she said warmly, and Julia had to suppress a flinch at the title. Thank you, Julia replied, trying to match her warmth. Maria will show you to your rooms, Dylan said briskly, already checking his phone. I have surgery in an hour. We'll discuss household routines tonight over dinner. And just like that, he was gone, leaving Julia standing in the grand foyer with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandelier. Don't mind him, Maria said gently. Dr. Collins isn't much for small talk, but he's a good man. Come, let me show you around. The tour was overwhelming, 15 rooms, including a library that made Julia's heart skip. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound classics and modern works. A reading nook by the window overlooked the gardens. This is beautiful, Julia breathed, running her fingers along the spines of first-edition novels. Dr. Collins is quite the reader, Maria said with a smile, though he rarely has time for it anymore. Perhaps you'll bring some life back to this room. Julia's bedroom, her wing, as Dylan had called it, was larger than her entire childhood home. The 4-poster bed was draped in silk, and French doors opened onto a private balcony. Mrs. Collins? Maria hesitated at the door. If I may, Dr. Collins hasn't been the same since Miss Olivia died. Perhaps you can help him find his way back to himself. Who was Olivia? Julia asked, though something in her chest tightened at the mention of another woman. His fiancée. She died in a car accident 3 years ago. He's been distant ever since. After Maria left, Julia unpacked her meager belongings, feeling like an imposter in the luxurious space. She changed into jeans and a sweater, the most casual clothes she owned, and made her way back to the library. For the first time since signing those papers, she felt at peace. She pulled down a volume of Emily Dickinson and settled into the window seat, losing herself in poetry until the sun began to set. Finding everything to your satisfaction? Julia startled, nearly dropping the book. Dylan stood in the doorway, having changed from his surgical scrubs into dark slacks and a white shirt that emphasized his tall, athletic build. The library is incredible, she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. I could spend days in here. Feel free. Most of those books haven't been touched in years. He moved into the room, and Julia noticed how he avoided looking at a particular shelf near the fireplace. Dinner's ready, he announced, Maria's made her famous pot roast. The dining room could have seated 20, but they sat at opposite ends of the massive table, the space between them feeling like an ocean. Crystal glasses and silver cutlery caught the light from the chandelier above. Julia looked at Dylan, then at the ridiculous distance between them, and stood up with her plate. "What are you doing?" Dylan asked, watching as she moved to the chair right beside him. "Sitting closer," she said simply, settling into the seat next to his. "We're not hosting a state dinner, Dylan." Dylan raised an eyebrow. "According to proper etiquette protocol, your seat should be at the other end of the table. It's not appropriate to simply sit wherever you want." Julia ignored his protocol lecture, cutting into her food. "I like human warmth. I'm not going to sit kilometers away from you when it's just the two of us here." Dylan stared at her for a moment, then broke into a genuinely fascinated smile. Apparently, Julia wasn't a woman without personality. She was authentic. "Tell me about your work," Dylan said, his tone warmer now. "You mean at the diner?" "No, your real work. The teaching you do on weekends." Julia looked up in surprise. "How did you—" "Your father mentioned it. What do you teach?" "Reading, mostly. Basic literacy for kids whose schools have given up on them." She set down her fork. "Why do you care?" "Because intelligence without application is worthless. You could have wallowed in self-pity about your circumstances, but instead you chose to help others. That speaks to character. And character is important to you?" "It's the only thing that matters." Dylan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Beauty fades. Money comes and goes. But character, that's permanent." They ate in contemplative silence until Dylan spoke again. "I'll be attending a medical conference in Chicago next week. There's a charity gala Friday night. You'll need appropriate attire. I've arranged for a personal shopper to visit tomorrow. Maria has the details." Julia bristled at his presumption. "I can dress myself." "Not for my world, you can't." Dylan's tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "There are rules, expectations. The way you present yourself reflects on both of us." "I see. More business arrangements." "Exactly." He stood, tossing his napkin onto the table. "I have research to review. Sleep well, Mrs. Collins." Alone again, Julia finished her wine and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. This was what she'd agreed to, a business transaction. So why did Dylan's casual dismissal sting so much? That evening, Dylan found Julia asleep in the library, curled up on the leather sofa with an open copy of Wuthering Heights resting on her lap. She looked peaceful in sleep, her face soft and unguarded, wearing a modest white satin nightgown that had somehow become slightly disheveled during her slumber. Dylan couldn't help but notice how graceful she looked even while sleeping. One delicate strap had slipped off her shoulder, and he found his gaze drawn to a small beauty mark on her neck that he'd never noticed before. Without thinking, he moved closer, studying the elegant curve of her throat. Almost unconsciously, he found himself leaning down to catch the subtle scent of vanilla from her hair. The fragrance was intoxicating, filling his senses and making his masculine instincts roar to life with an intensity that shocked him. His desire was immediate and overwhelming. He wanted to love her right there, to taste that exposed neck, to discover the flavor of her lips, to claim her completely. When he realized his thoughts had wandered into dangerous territory, he stepped back sharply, his heart pounding. This was wrong, wasn't it? He tried to compose himself, fighting to push aside the desire that had flared so unexpectedly and powerfully. Taking a steadying breath, he gently scooped Julia into his strong arms, careful not to wake her as he carried her toward her bedroom. The book fell softly to the floor, forgotten. Julia stirred as Dylan climbed the stairs, her face pressed against his broad chest. The intoxicating scent of his masculine cologne and aftershave filled her senses, and something deep inside her trembled with awareness. Her heart began to race, but she didn't have the courage to show she was awake, so she kept her eyes closed, pretending to sleep, while every nerve in her body came alive at their proximity. Dylan placed her gently on her bed, pulling the covers up with tender care. He was about to leave when he paused at the doorway, some internal battle playing across his features in the moonlight. Quietly, he returned to her bedside and pressed a lingering, soft kiss to the top of her head, his lips staying against her hair longer than necessary. He made sure she was properly covered, his fingers briefly brushing her cheek before he finally stepped away. He left, closing the door softly and leaving the room in darkness. Only then did Julia release the breathless gasp she'd been holding, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She lay still in the darkness, trying to process what had just happened. Her entire body was trembling from the aftershock of his touch, his scent still surrounding her. Had Dylan taken advantage of thinking she was asleep to lower his defenses and show her a glimpse of the man he truly was beneath the cold exterior he worked so hard to maintain? The tenderness in his touch, the way he'd held her like she was something infinitely precious, the lingering kiss, it all contradicted everything he'd told her about their arrangement being purely business. Julia touched her head where his lips had been, a warm flutter spreading through her chest and lower. Whatever Dylan Collins was trying to hide behind his walls of ice, she'd just felt the scorching heat of the fire burning underneath. And despite every warning bell in her head, she found herself desperately wanting to feel that fire consume her completely. Chicago glittered like a jewel below their hotel suite, but Julia barely noticed the view. She stood before the full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. The midnight blue gown Vivienne had chosen transformed her from small-town waitress to sophisticated socialite. "Ready?" Dylan's voice came from behind her. "We can't be late." He stopped mid-sentence when she turned around. His eyes traveled slowly from her face down to her feet and back up again, his expression one of pure amazement. "You look—" He paused, clearly struggling for words. "Breathtaking." In his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine, all sharp angles and dangerous elegance. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, despite the way he was looking at her. The charity gala was a world Julia had only seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over women dripping in diamonds and men who commanded boardrooms. Dylan moved through it all with practiced ease, his hand resting possessively on the small of Julia's back as he introduced her to his colleagues. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my wife, Julia," he said to a group of doctors and their spouses. They welcomed her warmly, and soon Julia found herself deep in conversation with several female physicians about her literacy work with underprivileged children. At first, Julia felt timid, acutely aware of the social differences between herself and these accomplished women. But as they showed genuine interest in her volunteer teaching, asking thoughtful questions about her methods and the children she helped, her confidence grew. She began speaking more animatedly about her work, her passion evident. Dylan had stepped away to speak with some colleagues, but he found himself unable to concentrate on their conversation. His attention kept drifting to Julia, the way she gestured when she spoke, her intelligent observations, the way she unconsciously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she felt nervous. He was genuinely impressed by her grace and intelligence. "Ah, how lovely to see a newlywed couple," said Dr. Margaret Hartwell, a respected physician in her 50s who had approached Julia with a warm smile. "This reminds me of when I married my late George." Julia looked confused for a moment. She had almost forgotten that she and Dylan were supposed to be a couple, even if it was just for show. Margaret, noticing Julia's puzzled expression, laughed gently. "I'm referring to Dylan, dear. It seems you've truly captured his heart. We haven't seen him this animated in such a long time. He hasn't taken his eyes off you all evening." She gestured toward Dylan, and Julia followed her gaze to find him watching her from across the room with undisguised admiration and desire. When he realized she was looking back, he quickly averted his eyes, as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. Julia felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Don't be embarrassed, darling," Margaret said with a mischievous laugh. "We're all adults here. We know what Dr. Collins is thinking about doing with you when he gets you home tonight." Julia laughed nervously, her face turning an even deeper shade of red. This was supposed to be business. Could Dylan really be having those kinds of thoughts about her, or was she going crazy? Their evening took an unpleasant turn when Professor Morrison, a colleague Dylan despised, approached Julia. He'd clearly had too much to drink and began making inappropriate comments. Dylan's protective instincts flared immediately. Without creating a scene, he moved to Julia's side with commanding presence, wrapping his arm around her waist and pulling her firmly against his body. "Professor Morrison," Dylan said, his voice controlled but dangerous, "I think you've had enough to drink. I suggest you step away from my wife." Morrison bristled, and they had a brief but heated exchange that made it clear Dylan wasn't playing games. Julia felt her stomach burn with desire. Dylan in full alpha male protective mode, defending his woman, his woody cologne filling her senses. She looked at him with burning desire. This strong, imposing man with his hands on her waist, protecting her as if she belonged to him, made her body tremble. She felt something warm between her legs and realized with shock that her body was betraying her completely. She could no longer be near Dylan, feeling his presence, his scent, his heat, without her body revealing how much she burned for him, even though her mind said no and denied it completely. "We should leave," Dylan whispered to her. "Before I do something I'll regret here." Julia could only nod, unable to speak. In the car, she sat in silence, watching Dylan's hands on the steering wheel. He had removed his jacket and was wearing only his dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Julia tried to look away from him. Her thoughts were going to dangerous places. Dylan began complimenting her on how well she'd handled herself at the party. But his voice, she couldn't handle it. She kept looking away, breathing deeply and staring out the window, trying to control her breathing. Dylan noticed her strange behavior. "What the hell is wrong with you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said quickly, just a little short of breath. "I got nervous with Professor Morrison acting like that, like some disgusting wolf. All those intense emotions gave me anxiety." It was a lie. Her anxiety was from the desire burning for Dylan. "Well, you can relax now," Dylan said gently, "because you have me to protect you from any danger." He removed one hand from the steering wheel and placed it on her knee, not in a malicious way, but gently. But that gesture ignited Julia even more, and she was practically combusting. "Dylan." Her voice failed. "Thank you, but please, don't touch me." Dylan immediately removed his hand and returned it to the steering wheel. "I understand, Julia. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cross any lines." "It's okay," she managed to say. What the hell was happening to her? She began to think that maybe she'd never had such a strong masculine presence near her. A man so protective who exuded testosterone in that way. The fact that Dylan had defended her and said things like, "You have me to protect you from any danger," excited her far more than she'd imagined possible. When they arrived home, Dylan still wanted to talk more about the evening, but Julia was literally breathless. She couldn't let him realize she was burning with desire for him. "I need to rest," she interrupted him, and quickly headed upstairs to her room. When she closed the door behind her, she slid down to the floor, asking herself, "What's happening to me? What is this feeling?" She touched her forehead. She was sweating. She went to take a cold shower, hoping to extinguish the fire she felt burning inside her. A torrential storm began that night, with strong winds battering Julia's windows and making sleep impossible. The thunder and lightning brought back childhood fears she thought she'd outgrown. Before she knew it, she was walking down the long corridor toward Dylan's room at the end of the giant mansion. Julia wore the same white silk nightgown from the night she'd fallen asleep in the library. She knocked on Dylan's door and heard his voice saying it was unlocked. She entered, and he asked if she needed something. "Dylan, I hope you don't think I'm too foolish, but I'm scared of this storm and the thunder. Could I sleep with you tonight? she asked hesitantly. The room was completely dark, so Dylan turned on his bedside lamp with its warm, dim yellow light and stood up. He was wearing pajama pants but no shirt. He walked toward her. When the lamplight illuminated his body, Julia felt weak but maintained her composure. He approached her and gently placed his hand on her face. Julia looked at him, almost losing her composure, trying not to let her eyes drift downward because she knew that if she did, all her pretense of indifference would crumble, and she couldn't let him realize he had her in his hands. "You're afraid of the rain?" he asked, still holding her chin but speaking closer and closer, though his tone held no malice. There was something Julia couldn't quite identify. "Yes, I am." "I know it sounds stupid, but I am," she said. Then he said, "You know, I've been thinking about the night of the party, the way you acted in the car, and I understood everything." "Everything what?" she asked. "You're not just afraid of the rain, Julia Parker. What are you really so afraid of?" he asked, close to her. She tried to pretend she didn't understand his question. "I suddenly remembered when it used to rain like this, and I would go sleep with my parents. I felt safe." And he said, "Is that how I make you feel? Is that why you came here? Do you feel safe with me?" "Yes." "You make me feel safe," she said, looking at his lips, knowing she could no longer hide how vulnerable she felt around him, but not in a bad way. He stepped back, grabbed a t-shirt from the chair in his room, and put it on. Julia snapped back to reality. "Make yourself comfortable, Mrs. Collins. The right side of the bed is mine," he said with a small laugh. He lay down on the right side of the bed, and she lay on the left side with her back to him because she didn't want to look at him. It was too much temptation. Dylan strategically positioned himself to look at her. There seemed to be a kilometer of space between them in that enormous bed, until a loud thunderclap made Julia jump, and before she knew it, she was pressed against Dylan's body, and he promptly embraced her with his strong arms. Julia was disconcerted when she realized what she'd done, but remained motionless, fearing the situation could become stranger than it already was. 5 minutes passed, and Dylan's heart was beating too fast. She could hear it because her ear was against his chest. She looked at him, and he was looking at her, while his fingers traced her shoulders and arms. Dylan's eyes were burning. She could see it, and she wasn't much different. She could smell him this time. Clean clothes with cotton soap scent. Maria insisted on keeping all the sleepwear with this fragrance that smelled like comfort, but mixed with his aftershave lotion, it brought a sensation that heightened Julia's senses. She leaned toward Dylan, noticing his accelerated heartbeat, the veins standing out on his arms, his deep and intense breathing. That's when she realized he wanted her too, and how she wanted him, but something inside her said she couldn't give in, couldn't surrender. This was a contract marriage. They couldn't mix things up. In her mind, he was a spoiled rich man, a good man, but spoiled. When he got tired of her, when this game ended, he would discard her like all the others. And believe me, once you've had a man like Dylan Collins, it might not be so easy to forget him. She needed to stick to the script, couldn't let her emotions override her reason. That's what she told herself, but deep down, her heart already belonged to him. When it seemed she would finally give in and kiss him, she whispered, "Dylan, the storm has passed. I'm going back to my room." Dylan seemed to look at her with disappointment. Just when it seemed she would give him exactly what he wanted, she broke his expectations. "All right, Julia. Good night," he said. When she was getting up from the bed, he said, "Julia," taking her arm, "I won't do anything until you ask me to." That phrase made her tremble inside. So this was really happening. He was fully aware of what was happening. It wasn't her delusion. He pulled her closer by the arm, but gently. "I won't do anything until you want to be mine. I won't do anything until you ask to belong to me." But that statement brought Julia back to reality. "I'm not your toy, Dr. Collins." Even though she was being prickly, this didn't cause him any discomfort. It was as if he already knew she would interpret it that way. "No, you're not." He released her arm and she returned to her room. Dylan was already at the table when she came down for breakfast. Julia sat farther away from Dylan. The atmosphere felt strange after last night. Dylan spent about 3 minutes watching her from his chair like a king pondering. Good Lord, that man exuded masculinity, and Julia didn't dare look directly at him that morning. Without moving, he said, "Julia." She looked at him and he said, "Sit next to me." But it didn't sound like a request. It sounded like an order. "I'm fine where I am, thank you," she replied. She wasn't rude, but used false cordiality. That man was dangerous for her. He stared at her for a while, until he got up himself and sat next to her, so close she could feel his breath. She froze. Dylan Collins leaving his place to sit next to her. "According to etiquette rules, you can't sit anywhere at the table just because you want to," she said with a mischievous smile. He gave a somewhat ironic smile. "Those foolish rules don't apply to me when I'm your husband." Julia looked at him, and he exuded power. It was as if he was sending a subliminal message that he was the alpha lion of the house and would claim what was his. This was no longer the Dylan who had signed an arranged marriage contract. This was a man dressed in power, who no longer saw her as business or mere conquest, but as something his, and for men like Dylan, what they consider theirs carries a different weight. Julia felt this. She couldn't explain exactly how she knew or what it meant, but she was about to find out. She wanted to change the direction of the conversation before things became difficult like the night before again. "I have a meeting with some hospital shareholders today, but when I return I want to discuss something with you." Julia felt a chill down her spine. He was too serious. Attractive? Yes, very, but serious. Somehow she already sensed what he wanted to say, so she decided to ignore this information. "Dylan, could you take me with you? Maria said she needed to shop at the market. I wanted to go along. Maria has been teaching me many things and—" Dylan interrupted her. "Julia, you're not in captivity. You can go wherever you wish to go." He said this in a strangely gentle way. "I'll take you both with me. While I'm in the meeting, you can shop." Julia nodded. Dylan was in the meeting listening to one of his shareholders talking about new rates and interest, expansion ideas, when his phone rang. It was Julia. He excused himself from the meeting and stepped out because he knew Julia never interrupted his business. If she was calling, it must be important. "Dylan." Her voice sounded nervous. "Royce is here. He's following me and Maria with 2 other men." Dylan shuddered. "What? Are you sure?" "I'm absolutely sure." Maria and I were walking through the streets and a black car was driving slowly behind us. Maria suggested we go into the market. That's when we saw Royce and 2 men walking behind us. "I don't know what to do, Dylan." Julia spoke while crying nervously. She didn't know what Royce wanted with her. The debt had been paid, but she knew it couldn't be anything good. "Where are you now?" His voice sounded commanding. "Still at the street market," she said nervously. "Is Maria with you?" "Yes, she's with me." "Stay calm, Julia. I'm coming to you. Near that market, a little ahead, there's a restaurant called Romano's. Can you get there safely?" "Yes, Royce isn't seeing us, but I see him looking for us." "Good. Go to that restaurant without making a scene. I'm on my way." Julia went to the restaurant with Maria, but they were spotted. Dylan felt rage rising to his head. He was fierce. He called 2 hospital security guards to go with him, not out of fear of Royce, but out of fear of what he might do if he lost his temper with Royce. As soon as Julia and Maria entered the restaurant, Royce and his 2 men entered behind them. Julia sat down and Royce immediately sat across from her and Maria while his men stayed distant to avoid attention. "What do you want, Royce? Why are you following us? The debt is already paid." "We don't owe you anything anymore," Julia tried to say without showing how nervous she was. Royce looked like a disgusting pig, looking at Julia as if he would devour her. The man sweated exactly like a pig. Maria looked frightened. "Ask your servant to leave, dear. This conversation is between the two of us, he said with false cordiality. Before Julia could even respond, Maria said, I'm not going anywhere, you disgusting worm. Where Julia goes, I go too. Royce looked at her angrily. Watch your words, old woman. He interrupted himself, pondering his anger and returning with false cordiality, like a sewer rat. Whatever, he said, turning back to Julia. Julia, dear, in the world of men, things work differently, if you know what I mean. Julia looked at him frightened. My negotiation with your father was never about money. From the beginning, I told him exactly what I wanted as payment. That old drunk must have gotten confused at some point. What? What did you ask my father for? She said, disgusted. Dear, don't play innocent. I've been watching you for a long time, Julia. So young, beautiful, delicate. In the nightclubs I frequent, there are no women like you. So, clean. If you try anything, I'll scream and everyone will look, Royce, Julia said, grabbing the napkin holder from the table, threatening to throw it at him. Julia, don't be impertinent. I'm a gentleman. I would never do anything to you here. That's precisely why I want to politely ask you to come with me. There's no other way for you to leave here, Royce said with a terrible, dirty smile. Maria grabbed her arm, fearful of Royce's intentions. Where are you going to take me? Just as Royce was about to answer, Dylan arrived, sitting next to Royce. Julia began crying with relief. Dylan arrived, taking command of the space, an imposing pose, with his legs somewhat spread like when a man says, "This place is mine." He put an arm around Royce. "Hello, Royce. How are you? Where do you want to take my wife?" he said, with ironic but irritated sympathy, while signaling the waiter to bring him a whiskey, which was promptly served. Dylan took a sip. The drink was to calm him enough not to finish Royce right there. "I'm waiting, Royce." Where do you want to take my wife?" This time there was no empathy in Dylan's voice, not even irony. There was contained hatred. After all, Dr. Collins knew how to be cold like no one else. "Dr. Collins, what a surprise to see you here. I heard you would be in an important meeting and—" "No meeting is more important than my wife, Royce. It's important that you know this," Dylan said, taking another sip. Royce seemed to be retreating exactly like the rat he was. Julia had stopped crying. Now she looked amazed at her husband, but not negatively. She had never seen this side of him. Now Royce seemed so small and insignificant that she could even feel sorry for him, thinking he actually had any chance against Dylan. "Royce," Dylan spoke, controlling the hatred in his voice very much. "You're messing with what's mine, and I don't like it when people mess with what's mine, when they look at what's mine, when they bother what belongs to me. I'm a possessive man, understand?" Royce already knew this side of Dylan. Royce knew he was much more than a rich doctor who owned a network of hospitals that flooded hundreds of places worldwide. So Royce began to wither, suddenly realizing the mess he had gotten himself into. He had let his diabolic instincts cross the line of common sense. But apparently Dylan was there, making him recover his memory. "Mr. Collins, I didn't mean to bother your wife. I just came to make an invitation." "Really, Royce? Because as soon as I walked through those doors, I saw my wife crying, and I get extremely irritated when people make my wife cry, especially if they're people like you. Let me explain something to you, Royce. My family has been in this city for centuries. You know that great fortunes like my family's weren't built solely with honest work, which means I have both sides of the coin in my hand. I chose to work with the beautiful side of my family, but there's the other side, Royce. Don't force me to use it." "Dr. Collins, this is all just a misunderstanding." Dylan gave a dry laugh. "Of course there was a misunderstanding, Royce, so I'm going to explain it to you once more, so there's never another misunderstanding. You're a rat," Dylan said, with his arm embracing Royce's neck and pulling him closer, speaking lower. "And I'm the lion. I don't think I need to tell you what happens when the rat gets in the lion's way, especially if it's tormenting the lioness. You're on my side of the city, Royce, and I also have contacts on your side of the city, so either way, If you bother me again, if you dare look at my wife, if you think you can chase her around, I will destroy you, not hurt you, not inconvenience you, destroy you completely. Am I clear? Understood, Royce said, red as a tomato. Not from anger, not from shame at the humiliation, but from fear and nervousness. After all, who was Dylan to cause so much fear in Royce? She realized that maybe Dylan had secrets she didn't know about, and perhaps it was better not to search too much. The whiskey I drank is on your tab, to compensate for the small displeasure you gave me this afternoon, he said, getting up calmly. Come on, dear, he said, standing and looking at Julia, extending his hand to her. She couldn't help but look at him with submission. This time it was stronger than her. Let's go, Maria, she said, somewhat disconcerted, and left hand in hand with her husband while Maria came behind them, scared but laughing at the situation. When they arrived home, without thinking, Julia threw her arms around Dylan's neck, burying her face against his chest. She felt him stiffen in surprise before his arms came around her, holding her close. Thank you, she whispered against his shirt. I've never had anyone defend me like that. Dylan's arms tightened around her. Get used to it, he said roughly. You're mine now. I protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her. Instead, it sent heat flooding through her veins. She pulled back to look at him, and the intensity in his blue eyes stole her breath. Dylan. He was going to kiss her. She could see it in the way his gaze dropped to her lips, in the way his hands tightened on her waist. Her own lips parted in invitation, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then Dylan stepped back abruptly, his mask sliding back into place. I should make some calls, ensure Royce doesn't cause any more trouble. The moment shattered, leaving Julia cold and confused. Of course, I'll let you work. That night, Julia couldn't sleep, tossing and turning without rest, consumed by desire and dangerous thoughts about Dylan. She kept remembering the imposing way he had handled Royce, how he had protected her so fiercely. His words when he said, "You're mine, and I protect what's mine." All of this was stealing her peace. So she got up and went to take a cold shower to calm herself. Dylan was passing through the hallway and decided to enter the room to talk to Julia, but she wasn't in bed as he expected to find her. That's when he heard the sound of the shower running. The door was ajar, and when he instinctively went there, before opening the bathroom door completely, he stepped back and reprimanded himself. Dylan, you idiot. What are you doing? What kind of sick pervert have you become? He said to himself. But the truth was that Dylan was struggling hard to control himself. Since he married Julia, he hadn't touched another woman out of respect for her, even though the marriage was just for show, even though she didn't want to give in to him, even though he was already climbing the walls. When they made the deal, he thought logically that he would still go to clubs when he felt the need, but his relationship with Julia had taken unexpected paths, and he wanted to make sure she wouldn't mind. After all, Julia was unpredictable. He doubted whether she would agree normally or set the house on fire while he was sleeping. To him, she was an enigma. He thought about coming back later and was heading toward the door. "Dylan?" Julia spoke, coming out wrapped in a white towel with her wet hair stuck to her face. "What are you doing here?" Dylan looked at her from head to toe, the warm light of the lamp creating an unfair and cruel play of light and shadow over her. There, in the center of the room with her hair dripping, water running down her neck. Jesus, Dylan thought as he looked at her. It was strange to see such an imposing man as Dylan Collins becoming awkward. "Earlier," he said, coming a little closer, "I said I wanted to talk to you." "Yes, I remember." "I'm listening," she said with an attentive look. She already imagined what would come from this conversation, but didn't know if she was ready for it. "Could you get dressed first?" "Sorry, I can't concentrate like this," he said, running his hands over his forehead. "Of course, Dylan. Give me a minute," she said with a slight laugh. When she returned, Dylan was sitting on the edge of her bed. "I'm ready. You can speak," Julia said, dressed in her black silk nightgown with thin straps that fit her body perfectly. Although this provocative habit of Julia's seemed intentional, it wasn't. The truth was that Julia still had no notion of the power she had over Dylan. She didn't realize that this man was already surrendered to her. He looked at her from bottom to top, lowered his head, running his hands through his hair, and stood up. Suddenly he was again that man, almost 6'3", tall, standing right in front of her. Imposing. But this time there was something different in his look, a certain vulnerability. "So? What did you want to tell me earlier?" she said, genuinely curious. "Julia, I know that in the beginning it was supposed to be just a contract, a business deal, but things have changed between us." His voice was firm. "Changed?" she asked, not understanding where he was going. "Yes, much more than I expected," he said, sitting in the room's armchair while serving himself whiskey. Julia had already noticed that he drank whiskey when he felt he needed help controlling himself and not letting emotions cross acceptable lines. He took 2 sips of whiskey and stood up again toward her, who looked at him confusedly. "I'm not understanding where you want to go." "When we signed the contract, I told you that I would still go to clubs if I felt the need, and that you shouldn't be bothered by it," he said, close to her, so close he could feel her breath with the scent of whiskey. "Yes, I remember." "And?" Julia was feeling strangely uncomfortable with this conversation. On the night of the storm, when she had gone to sleep with him, when she left his room to return to hers, she knew she wouldn't be able to fall asleep so soon, so she went to the library to get a book to read. Dylan's MacBook had been left open on the table, and suddenly, coincidentally, WhatsApp notifications started arriving that were connected to the MacBook. Julia wasn't usually nosy, but she wasn't made of steel either. She went to see who was sending so many messages to Dylan at that hour of the morning. Amanda. She looked at the photo. A beautiful redhead. The messages said, "Dylan, darling, it's been a while since you came here to Club Elite. I miss you. When are you going to stop playing house and come see me?" Dylan had already seen the message but didn't respond. Julia's heart raced. It seemed her heart had become a drum beating hurriedly. What was this pain? Why was she feeling this way? So she went to the library window and tried to calm herself. "Damn it, Julia, pull yourself together. You have nothing. He can sleep with other women if he wants, can't he?" But Julia couldn't help being shaken by the idea of Dylan going to a nightclub after another woman. That's why at breakfast she sat far from him. It was better to start distancing herself emotionally, or she would end up getting hurt. "I haven't gone once," he said, looking into her eyes. "Since we got married, I haven't slept with any other woman." "I know. But why are you telling me this?" Julia said, becoming a little more serious. "Because I know you saw Amanda's message on my MacBook when you went to the library after leaving my room," he said seriously, but not angrily. She was caught by surprise, like a child who was making mischief in secret. "How do you know that? How do you know I saw it?" she said, stepping back. "My MacBook has a security system that takes a screenshot with the webcam of curious people who mess with my things," he said, gently advancing toward her. "Dylan, Julia." His voice was almost a whisper. "I told you, Julia, that I would never touch you unless you asked me to," he said, placing his hands on the back of her neck while pressing his forehead against hers. "Dylan," she whispered. "Julia, I would never force you into anything you don't want. But I feel that you desire me as much as I desire you. But I'm a man, Julia. You must have noticed how sharp my masculine instincts are." His speech was almost a prayer. She knew it was true. She remembered the way he behaved at breakfast, the way he fiercely defended her from Royce. Definitely Dylan didn't lack testosterone. "I just miss human warmth, waking up with a woman by my side, but I don't want just any woman. I want you," he continued. His eyes were closed while his forehead remained pressed against Julia's, who also had her eyes closed, trying to control herself. "I just need you to tell me. I just need you to tell me that you feel the same for me. If you tell me, if you say you feel the same for me, I'll wait for you as long as it takes. If you say you desire me as much as I desire you, I won't go anywhere tonight. I'll stay here waiting until you're ready. I just need you to let me know that I won't be waiting for you forever." Dylan's words penetrated her heart deeper than Julia imagined. That man, almost 6'3", standing in front of her, with that striking perfume scent, aftershave, whiskey, desire, testosterone, firm arms, athletic and heavy body, ready to press Julia's body against a mattress, ready to make her a very happy woman that night, waiting only for her signal, or at least her promise that someday there would be a signal. What was this? Was Dylan Collins really baring his soul to Julia, showing his vulnerable heart burning with desire for her? Yes, he was. Julia was afraid of getting hurt. Men like Dylan, when they get tired of their new toy, go after another. She knew it was like that, didn't she? "What happens if I say no?" she said, almost like a prayer. "You'll break my heart, but I'll respect your choice. I don't want you halfway. I want you completely. Dylan, please don't ask me this," she said, gently pulling away from him. We can't do this. We can't take this forward. Mixed feelings," she said, already coming out of the hypnotic effect he had caused on her and returning to reality. "Why not?" he said, not understanding what the big problem was. "Because you would never look at me if you hadn't bought me." When she realized it, the words had already come out of her mouth, as fast and cruel as an arrow. She regretted it, but there was no going back. "So that's how you see this? That's how you see me? As a shallow, selfish man who goes around buying toys for his collection?" Dylan had already put his mask back on. The man with the vulnerable heart had withdrawn. The truth was that Julia didn't expect her words to come out with all that weight. "That's not what I meant, Dylan." "But that's exactly what you said. All this time I thought something was happening between us, that you felt the same too. But your words made it evident that you always saw this only as a contract." Dylan didn't speak angrily or harshly, nor angrily. He said it disappointedly. "All right, I understand. In that case, good night, Mrs. Collins." "Dylan, no." Julia felt tears coming, but Dylan was already leaving her room. Julia broke down crying. 15 minutes later, she heard Dylan's car engine starting, so she knew he was going to see her. And it seemed he took her heart with him. Suddenly, desperate knocks on the door. "Girl, is everything all right?" "Please, Maria, go away." "I don't want to talk," said Julia, crying more than she would like. So Maria entered the room without authorization and went to hug her. Julia melted into tears, a cry that came from her soul. She began to have a crisis. "Maria," she said between sobs, "forgive me for being rude to you. I can't speak. Don't worry, girl. Don't worry." Maria ran her hands through Julia's hair with an expression of concern and comfort at the same time. Julia cried a cry that seemed to come from her insides. She wasn't crying only for Dylan, but for everything. She never had time to cry. As soon as her mother died, she had to worry about her father becoming an alcoholic, a gambling addict, then the debts growing, money disappearing from her account, the house threatening to be auctioned. Julia cried because her whole life was a struggle full of difficulties. She always lived in a state of survival, never knowing what peace was, always imagining what worse would come next. But after she met Dylan, he made her feel safe, protected, made her feel she didn't need to worry about anything else, but she couldn't surrender. She felt he would use her and then not even remember her anymore. That's what rich men like him usually did with poor girls like her. Julia ended up falling asleep there in Maria's lap after crying so much. The next day, she woke up in her bed and went down for breakfast. Maria went to talk to her. "Maria, I woke up a little late today. Has Dr. Collins already had his breakfast?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Mrs. Collins? He didn't sleep at home last night, did he? He still hasn't returned, has he?" There was coldness in Julia's voice. "I'm sorry, girl," Maria said with a sad look, looking at the floor. Doctor, Collins hasn't returned yet, but let's think positive. Maybe his car broke down somewhere, or maybe... Julia gave a dry laugh. Maria, Julia said, looking with compassion at Maria with eyes full of tears, but refusing to let them fall. Thank you for trying to cheer me up, but we know where Dylan is. Dylan is in another woman's arms. She paused, hearing herself say this. Maria, help me pack my bags. I'm leaving today. I won't stay here for Mr. Collins to humiliate me anymore. Julia packed her bags, few, taking only what she brought, leaving behind all the expensive clothes and jewelry she received as gifts from Dylan. She left with only the suitcase she brought. She left a note on Collins's bed. Dylan, I thank you for all the help you gave me and everything you did for me, but I think this theater can no longer continue, for obvious reasons. As for my part of the contract, I'm aware of the penalty for breach. I will try to get a loan from the bank today to pay you everything I owe. Thank you. Signed, Julia Parker. When night came, Dylan arrived home. He entered through the door like a hurricane, determined to talk to Julia. But when he reached her room where he imagined she would be, she was no longer there. He went looking for her in the library. She wasn't there either. Then he went through the house calling Maria. Yes, sir, I'm here, Maria responded promptly. Maria, where is Julia? Her things disappeared from the closet. Her belongings, too, he said desperately, thinking Royce might have tried something. Mr. Collins? Julia left, Maria said with a sad, low voice. What? Left? What do you mean? Why didn't you call me, Maria? His voice was angry. Sir, I tried, but she wouldn't let me. She made me promise I wouldn't call. She said she didn't want to be found, said Maria with a somewhat desperate voice, wondering if she had done something stupid. Maria, you have to obey me, not her, Dylan roared. As soon as the words left his mouth, he stepped back, realizing how arrogant that had been. Was Julia right about him? Rich and spoiled, cold and selfish. Maria, forgive me. I didn't mean to speak to you that way, he said, disconcerted but nervous. It's all right, Mr. Collins. Everyone's nerves are on edge. Did she say where she was going? She didn't say, Mr. Collins, but she left you a note. Dylan's heart broke reading it. He knew he had failed miserably with Julia by letting his instincts speak louder. But here was another surprise about Julia. She was proud. There was no debt, money, power, or status that could truly buy her. 3 days passed. The house seemed like a wake. Collins was more irritated than normal, rude, treating everyone badly. He couldn't control it. His heart was aching. How could he be kind to others while there was a spear in his heart? But Julia could, couldn't she? He caught himself thinking. Mr. Collins, said Maria. Phone call for you. Is it Julia? He said, looking up from his breakfast plate. No, but... Then tell them I died, Dylan interrupted her brusquely. It's Detective Sanders, your friend. He said he found out where she is. Collins got up abruptly, as if his life depended on it. He gave an ironic laugh on the phone when Sanders told him that Julia was simply in the most obvious place, her father's old house. Benjamin no longer lived there because he was hospitalized in Dylan's clinic treating his alcohol and gambling addiction. But the house was still there. It was raining heavily. Someone knocked on the door. Julia was apprehensive, thinking it might be Royce, knowing she was now unprotected. But even so, she went to the door. Whatever it was, they couldn't destroy her more than she already was. Dylan, what are you doing here? She said, already in defensive mode. Dylan was soaked. I didn't bring anything of yours. I left in the note that I'll pay for breaking the contract. You don't need to. Dylan interrupted her, advancing on her like a lion that had been caged for days with hunger, kissing her desperately. Julia was literally caught by surprise but couldn't resist. Between tears while he kissed her, she began to push him. Let me go. She pushed him. Get out of my house, she said, crying. But this time Dylan knew exactly what he was doing. He approached her calmly this time, placing his hand on the back of her neck and saying in a low, hoarse voice, "Julia, listen to me." "I didn't sleep with Amanda." "What?" she said with eyes full of tears, pain, and confusion. "But you said you would if I didn't want to sleep with you." "No, Julia. That's not what I said. I said I wanted you to tell me you felt the same for me, and if you did, I would wait as long as necessary until you felt ready." His voice was calm, strangely calm. "But I told you that. I implied my answer was no. Why didn't you go after her then?" Because she's not you," he said, almost in a whisper. "She's not stubborn like you, gentle, altruistic. She doesn't break my etiquette rules and doesn't disobey my orders either. She doesn't run to my room in the middle of the night because she's afraid of thunder." Julia cried, but this time it was a different cry. Dylan hadn't broken her heart as she thought. "I love you, Julia," he said without rehearsal. "I went to sleep in a hotel. I needed to cool my head. I didn't go to breakfast because I didn't want to face you. Didn't want to face how stupid you made me feel for knowing that a man as rational as me was completely surrendered to your sweetness. I came looking for you, willing to say this, but all I found was your note." "Dylan," she said, almost in a whisper. "I want to." What do you want?" Dylan said, expecting her to say she wanted him to leave. "I want you," she said, returning a short kiss. "I want you to make love to me." Dylan felt his body tremble. Was the woman he most desired in life really asking him to love her? Or was he going crazy and losing his mind? "I want it now. I want it right here," Julia said, between desperate kisses. Dylan's hands found the hem of her simple dress, lifting it slowly as his lips traced a path down her neck. Julia's breath caught as she felt his warm touch against her skin, every nerve ending coming alive under his caress. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her ear, his voice rough with desire but still giving her one last chance to change her mind. "I've never been more sure of anything," she breathed, her hands working to unbutton his shirt. With rain drumming against the windows, Dylan's hands trembled slightly as they found the hem of her simple dress. His eyes never left hers as he slowly lifted the fabric, his fingertips grazing her skin and sending shivers through her entire body. "You're trembling," he whispered, his voice rough with desire. "So are you," Julia breathed back, her hands working to unbutton his soaked shirt, feeling the heat radiating from his chest. Dylan's shirt fell to the floor with a wet sound, and Julia's breath caught at the sight of him. Broad shoulders, defined chest, the evidence of his desire for her unmistakable. He was beautiful and powerful, and in this moment he was completely hers. "Julia!" He said her name like a prayer, as his hands traced the curve of her waist, the swell of her hips. "I've dreamed of this. Of you. Every night since that first day." His lips found her neck, pressing soft kisses along her throat while his hands explored her body with reverent touches. Julia's head fell back, a soft moan escaping her lips as sensation overwhelmed her. "Dylan, please," she whispered, not even sure what she was asking for, only knowing she needed more of him, all of him. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the old sofa where they had sat as children listening to her mother's stories. But there was nothing innocent about the way he laid her down, his body covering hers as his lips claimed her mouth in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. Their remaining clothes disappeared slowly, each revelation met with gasps and whispered endearments. When Dylan finally joined with her, Julia cried out, not in pain, but in the overwhelming rightness of it all. This was what she had been waiting for her entire life without knowing it. "I love you," Dylan breathed against her ear as they moved together, their bodies finding a rhythm as natural as breathing. "I love you, Julia. Only you." "I love you too," she whispered back, her nails tracing down his back as waves of pleasure built between them. "I'm yours, Dylan. Completely yours." When release finally claimed them both, It was with Julia's name on Dylan's lips and tears of joy streaming down her face. They collapsed together, hearts racing and bodies still trembling from the intensity of their connection. As they lay entwined on the old sofa, Dylan pulled a throw blanket over them and held Julia close against his chest, pressing soft kisses to her hair. "I meant what I said," he whispered. "I love you, Julia Parker, not Mrs. Collins, not the woman I married for convenience. You, the real you." Julia looked up at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you too. I think I have since that first day in the diner when you saw me for who I really was." Dylan smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in days. "So what happens now?" "Now," Julia said, tracing patterns on his chest, "we go home, together, and we start our real marriage." As the storm raged outside, they held each other close, finally free to love without fear, without barriers, without the weight of contracts and obligations. They had found something real in the midst of their arranged beginning, and nothing would ever be the same. Julia stood in their bedroom, adjusting the emerald green dress Dylan had chosen for her, the same color as the gown from their first gala together. She could hear voices and soft music drifting up from the garden below, where Maria had been bustling about all day, preparing what Dylan had mysteriously called a small gathering. "Are you ready, Mrs. Collins?" Dylan appeared in the doorway, devastatingly handsome in a navy suit that made his blue eyes even more striking. "I still don't understand why you're being so secretive," Julia said, though she was smiling. "What exactly are we celebrating?" Dylan's eyes sparkled with mischief as he offered her his arm. "You'll see." They walked through the house and out to the garden, where Julia gasped in surprise. The space had been transformed with twinkling lights strung between the trees, white roses everywhere, and a small group of their closest friends gathered around what looked like an altar. "Dylan, what is this?" Dr. Margaret Hartwell approached them with a warm smile, wearing a beautiful lavender dress. "Julia, dear, how lovely you look. Are you ready for your real wedding?" "My what?" Julia turned to Dylan, her heart racing. Dylan took her hands in his expression tender and serious. "Julia, 6 months ago you became my wife because of circumstances neither of us chose. But today, I want you to marry me because we choose each other, because we love each other." He dropped to one knee right there in front of everyone, pulling out a ring box. Inside was the most beautiful ring Julia had ever seen, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like stars. "This was my grandmother's ring," Dylan said, his voice thick with emotion. "She told me once to only give it to a woman who could love me for who I am, not what I have. Julia Parker, will you marry me again? For real this time?" Through her tears, Julia could only nod as Dylan slipped the ring onto her finger. The small crowd erupted in applause as he stood and kissed her. The ceremony was simple, but perfect. Maria stood beside Julia as her matron of honor, no longer the housekeeper, but the woman who had become like a mother to her. Dr. Margaret served as one of their witnesses, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. When it came time for his vows, Dylan's voice was steady and strong. "Julia, you came into my life when I thought I was beyond saving. You saw past the walls I'd built around my heart and loved me anyway. You challenged me, changed me, and made me want to be the man you deserve. I promise to love you, not just for who you are today, but for who you're still becoming. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and choose you every day for the rest of our lives." Julia was crying too hard to speak clearly during her own vows, but the love in her voice was unmistakable as she promised to love Dylan through whatever life brought them. After they were pronounced husband and wife for the second time, Dylan had one more surprise. "There's someone here who wants to see you," he said softly, leading Julia toward the house. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the terrace, and Julia's breath caught. "Dad?" Benjamin Parker looked completely different, healthy, clean-shaven, and with clear eyes she hadn't seen in years. He'd gained some weight and looked truly well for the first time since her mother's death. "Hello, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. Julia ran to him, throwing her arms around him as they both broke down, crying. "I'm so sorry," Benjamin whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry for what I put you through, for the choices I made, for failing you when you needed me most." "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you're my father," Julia sobbed against his chest. "I love you. I never stopped loving you." Dylan watched from a respectful distance as father and daughter held each other, both of them healing from wounds that had been festering for too long. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Benjamin had returned to his sober living facility, he wasn't ready to live alone yet, but he was making remarkable progress. Dylan and Julia sat in their library. "How did you arrange all this?" Julia asked, curled up against his side. "I've been planning it for weeks. I wanted to give you the wedding you deserved, with the people who matter most to you." Dylan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Your father has been sober for 2 months now. He's been asking about you every day." "Thank you," Julia whispered, "for everything, for saving him, for saving me, for giving us both a second chance." "You saved me too, you know," Dylan said softly. "You brought me back to life.